Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little. I was sent in this video as well as the analysis of CzechRaizor. This is from the Big Five that he won recently. And we're going to be going through his hands that he played, but also his analysis. He's going to be discussing what he is doing and why, and hopefully we can find some things that perhaps he can improve on. So let's go ahead and get right to it.
Alright, hi, it's Victor and welcome to the review of Big Five of PokerStars tournament I managed to win last week or 2 weeks ago. Anyway, so let's jump into the action and see if I could have made any different decision, or could have done any spots differently or in a different way. I would like to just quickly go over my HUD, which looks a bit funky, keeps me happy during session, lots of colors. Right, VPIP, PFR, preflop raise, total 3-bet, M, which is also called true big blind, and it presents a sum of small blind, big blind and NTs in play. I think this is really good when stacks get shorter and you have a borderline decisions, borderline push or shoves, because it counts the NTs and the size of the NTs. Sometimes it can be 80% of a big blind, but it can be 140% of a big blind, and you have the same amount of big blinds, but you do not have the same amount of M. So sometimes when it's a very close spot, it can be a profitable shove with high NTs, and it could be a fold with low NTs, which big blinds do not illustrate. It doesn't show you.
That's definitely a good thing to take note of. I personally have never really used M for whatever reason. I've always just looked at the effective big blind. I sort of have done it in my head. But I do imagine that if you want to learn poker using the M, that is perfectly fine. And like CzechRaizor said, M is the sum of the everything in the pot pre-flop. So it's basically a gauge of how long you can go before you blind out, or how many M's you have instead of how many big blinds you have, because when there's more chips in play, you steal more chips whenever you elect to steal. So you should be shoving wider. And in turn, you should also be defending wider whenever someone shoves on you whenever you're playing very shallow stacked.
10 is small blind steal, total steal from small blind. 55 is a flop c-bet. 59.
I missed that. Let's rewind it.
10 is small blind steal.
Small blind steals. So I suppose this means how often small blind raises. I actually don't use this stat at all. I'm kind of surprised. I'm kind of interested to see how you're going to use it as we go forward.
Total steal from small blind. 55 is a flop c-bet. 59 fold to flop c-bet.
So these two numbers are definitely very relevant. My heads up display is usually pre-flop raise, VPIP, steal percentage, which is just late position steal percentage. Fold big blind to steal. Then 3-bet, fold to 3-bet, 4-bet, fold to 4-bet. And then flop, turn, and river, continuation bet, check raise, and fold to continuation bet. Yeah. So that is roughly what my HUD looks like. I'm not really sure what the small blind steal is for, but we'll see as we go forward. I definitely suggest everyone use a HUD if you do not use a HUD, by the way. It's kind of mandatory, especially if you're going to play a lot of tables.
Not too many hands, probably over 600. So for this reason, I would like to choose those hands that I played bigger pots in. More interesting spots, obviously. So I'll skip just very ABC, trivial folds, and so on and so on.
So one thing you mentioned here is that you're going to skip the irrelevant hands, but quite often the quote unquote irrelevant hands can be somewhat relevant. Like a lot of the time you'll see people failing to 3-bet in scenarios from late position where I think they should at least consider it. I'll also see a lot of time people folding small blinds way too often when they should perhaps be fighting a little bit harder. Often people do not defend the big blind wide enough. So there are certainly scenarios where I think you can perhaps get a little bit more out of line than maybe other people think. And a lot of spots are not necessary to take. So for example, like say they fold to low jack C2 raises and you have king 5 of diamonds on the button. It's a spot where you don't need to be 3-betting very often, but you should sometimes. But maybe we'll see those as we progress. And if we don't see any of that, it kind of implies that maybe that's a spot you could loosen up your game a bit.
Right, so the first hand is Queen Jack suited. As I can see, when looking over the table quickly, just glancing at the table. There's quite a few weaker players, and I'll be adjusting accordingly, hopefully. So this first hand, it gets limped and overlimped to me. I think good options here. I can ISO to about 4x, 3.5x, 4x, 4.5x. I do not mind calls. It's a very good hand. It's a good hand to be played in position, and I certainly would not mind a multi-way pot, which is okay. I can also overlimp and call raise, providing it's not more than 4x, and some players, especially the weaker players, go along. I can complete the raise, so that is the plan. Let's see what I did. Alright, overlimped.
I think limping here is fine. I have no problem with that. I would almost always limp in this spot. If I'm going to raise, it's usually going to be pot, and I would be potting it with all of my hands when we are very, very deep stacked, because you don't really want to price your opponents in. You'd rather them put in more pre-flop and then check fold more to you on the flop.
In the retrospect, looking back at this spot of the situation, I think I could have ISO raised to roughly about 110, 20, 30 would have been good, but I don't hate it.
One thing also worth mentioning, I don't know if you have the number of hands listed that these players have. I definitely think you need that stat up, because if you have like 500 hands on someone and they're playing 40/0, that's very different than if you have 10 hands on someone and they're playing 40/0. So maybe you have that indicated somehow. I just don't understand. But I would write that down. Also, I see you have various sizes for your stats. I'm assuming those mean something. I'm a little bit, oh, maybe this is the number of hands. Okay, I see. Maybe this big number is the number of hands you have on people. That would make sense. Okay, I understand. So VPIP, pre-flop raise, 3-bet, then M. Then we have the other numbers that we're probably not going to deal with too much, because these numbers take a lot more hands to populate.
They do not hate limping. And the reason I should have raised to 110 is probably avoid this spot, and should have played the pot with initiative.
Yeah, I don't think you should make it 110 though. I think you should just go ahead and make it, well, pot size in this scenario would be 135, about 165. So I'm a fan of making slightly bigger raises when deeper stacked, and that's just because you don't mind playing big pots. I think a lot of tournament players are very used to making smaller bet sizes, and I think you're going to find that making bigger bet sizes when you're deep is better for you. If you watch a lot of the best poker players in the world, they're often using very big bet sizes when deep, and that's just because you want to be able to play huge pots if you flop well. And if you lose an extra 30 or 40 chips early in this tournament when you fail to make a good hand, it just doesn't matter. Whereas if you can win an extra 4,000, or not 4,000, I guess maybe extra 500 because you made the pot slightly bigger on the flop, because by the time you get to the river, the pot will be much bigger. I think that's going to be beneficial for you. You're giving up a little bit now for the option to play a gigantic pot later.
Once one of the weaker player completes, I think I could have gone either way here. Folding it's okay, calling the raise is alright, but it's not the best pot in the world, because I'll be playing the PFR peripheral brazier out of position.
I think calling's mandatory.
Best thing, but I got decent hand. I got position on this player and got the weaker player in the pot, so I decided to complete.
Here we're completing mainly because our pot odds are amazing. I do not see how you could possibly fold this once you put in the small amount. I think you see a lot of people limping and then folding, and I think that's almost always a big disaster. Whenever you're getting pot odds with a reasonable hand, you typically do want to call, and this hand flops pretty well. You just have to be careful when it comes like Jack 7-3 and your opponent wants to put in a bunch of money.
Weaker player checks, I check as well, and peripheral brazier bets over half pot, and this is what I don't really like. I should have folded. The reason behind this call is that I'm repping pairs from 4s to 8s, and I try to float this pot out of position, having two backdoor straight or backdoor flush draw, good at Jack, Queen, obviously good cards, and 9, king, and club are cards that I can continue. And the thing is, the problem is that he's going to barrel king quite often. So anyway, this is the reason behind this, and I don't like it. I should have folded. This is a very clear fold.
I think this is also a very clear fold. The main time you want to be continuing in the pot is when you think a raise will give you some fold equity. And I think if I'm going to continue here, I would like to raise. I think this is also a hand you could put into a leading range if you want to have a leading range, but I don't really want to have a leading range here. So I think if you check raise to something like 800, you can continue barreling on the obviously good turns for you. And it's going to put your opponent in a pretty rough spot. You'll actually find that your opponent should not have connected very well with this board most of the time, and I imagine he should have some overcards in his range, and he may also just have random hands like ace-7 in his range, so he decides to raise the limpers. So I think if you're, I would not hate raise if you made it 800 in the spot, but I definitely do not like calling. I'm a pretty big opponent of floating out of position. I am not a big fan of floating from out of position just because you're going to have a very difficult time winning the pot. It's so easy for it to go check on the turn, and then your opponent can just call any river bet with pocket 8s, for example. He may even decide to call any river bet with a hand like ace-king for whatever reason because he thinks that you're floating with a bunch of junk. You don't have an easy way to apply a ton of pressure. I think that's really the issue, unless you're going to take some abnormal line, and then some people just blindly call down versus abnormal lines. So you really do set up very unclear situations for yourself by calling the spot.
I had a plan that if he raised a big ace, ace jack, ace queen, ace king, or maybe hands like king queen suited, he would shut down and give up on the turn because there are no any draws on this flop, and I can credibly represent hands there are pocket pairs, even sets. So basically all pairs from 4s to 8s, maybe 9s that I decided to overlimp and not either raised. Maybe some jack x, jack 10, 10-9 suited, queen 10 suited, king 10 suited, ace 10 suited. There's quite a few hands that I can represent, and the board is not drawy, so it looks quite credible. So it's not the worst play in the world, but I do not see this being a profitable one as well.
So you also mentioned that, well, I guess one concern with raising this flop is that you're not really representing much, but I don't think that matters so much in the big 5. You have to realize this is not an incredibly difficult tournament in terms of the player pool. I mean, this tournament gets a bazillion players, and most of them are not very good. So I really don't think you need to be so concerned with representing so much. And this is a spot where I think that your range to check raise can be quite snug if you are looking for some sort of a balanced point of view, to where you could be check raising perhaps with only queen jack of clubs, queen jack hearts, queen jack of spades, maybe 8-7 of hearts, 8-7 of spades, 8-7 of clubs, just the various gut shots, and then sets. I think that's a fine raising range here, and I think it'll apply a lot of pressure to your opponent in a pretty unexploitable way. But even then, I don't think you need to be worried so much about what you are representing. I think it's going to sound bad. I think you're somewhat overthinking the spot. This is a scenario where your hand's just not very good, and you should probably fold. Do not, at least I would suggest you do not worry yourself with coming up with these creative lines early in tournaments. I don't think it's going to turn up very much equity or make very much equity for you. So I would certainly just fold the flop. But if I am going to play, I'm going to raise. I'm not looking to do this out of position float. If you do out of position float, you probably want to develop some sort of a turn leading range, and that's hard to do.
Turns an ace, I check, and I get barreled off. I'm facing the second barrel, and obviously I have to fold here. So overall, I do not like this sport. I do not like the way I played it. Pre-flop, I think, is a slightly better option to ISO, and post-flop should have folded on the flop. I think, yeah, it is a better option.
One thing also worth mentioning is that I think that if you check raise the flop, you will almost certainly win on the turn. if you barrel there, because you'll make a lot of his ace highs fold on the turn, and then the ace high or a lot of the various overcards that come could be pretty scary. So I think you win the pot a lot more often by check raising. Of course, that opens you up to losing a big pot, but I think that's not such a bad option.
So the blinds are now 25-50, and I got pocket tens in hijack. It's 40 to me, and I decided to make it 3x, which I like. It's a good size. This blind level, because I would not be playing too many hands. So once my range is strong, I can build larger pots and push my opponents into larger mistakes. So definitely I like making this 3x.
It's interesting to me that you were wanting to raise over 2 limpers with even deeper stacks to 3.5x or 4x, and here you're opening to 3x. So it doesn't really make sense to me that you would raise, roughly the same amount or just a tiny bit more over multiple limpers. I think, again, that you should probably be raising a little bit bigger over the limpers pre-flop in the previous hand.
I get 3 callers. Just not the best thing when you have a middle pocket pair, but let's see what happens post flop. Alright, this is a very, very, very good flop for me. It's very favorable flop. It's very unlikely that any of these players has got 2x. Shouldn't want to have 2x. It's probably the big blind, but the guy is 14-9, so it should be relatively tight, and only hand I can see, only deuce x. It's probably like ace, deuce suited. It's probably the only hand. This guy could have ace deuce off.
I would not blindly discount ace-2 offsuit from the big blind closing the action. You mentioned that small blind could have ace-2 off. He's only playing 25-11. It's not like he's crazy. I mean, these guys' stats are not too incredibly different, and this guy is in the small blind, not closing the action. So I think this guy is less likely to have ace-2 off, even though he is a bit wider than this guy. I mean, we have more hands on this player, so maybe that makes you think this is just much more clean information, and it probably is. But I think closing the action, I wouldn't be surprised if people are splashing with ace-2 offsuit in the $5 game.
This guy probably could have the ace-2 off, but the likelihood is very, very...
Again, I don't think this guy's going to have ace-2 offsuit very often at all. The only guy I'm really concerned with ace-2 offsuit is the big blind, but certainly both players could have ace-2 suited, or all players could have ace-2 suited.
Small, and the chance is very slim. So I'm confident I have the best hand, vast, very, very large majority of the time, like 80-90% of the time. Definitely going to c-bet this for value. I like going half pot because I can get value from lower pairs. I do not think any pocket pair is going to fold for 1-bet or 2-1-bet. Half pot is just under half pot. I think it's a good sizing. So I get all pocket pairs to call some 7x. These two guys can have 7x, 7-8 suited, 9-7 suited, 7-6 suited, maybe ace-7, and obviously flush draws.
So that range you just outlined, I think that range, 7 or better, pretty much, and flush draws will call a much bigger bet. I think in this spot, I would probably bet a tiny bit smaller, and the purpose of that is to try to keep in hands like pocket threes and ace-jack, stuff like that. I think your bet size is fine, but I think I would have gone just a hair smaller for that reason. I think if you're only trying to get called by a 7 or better, you can bet bigger because, a 7's not going to fold to any realistic bet. Like, if you bet 450 here, 7's going to call every time. So you want to make sure you don't really split it in the middle where you're making your opponents fold their garbage and you're not extracting, garbage meaning small pairs like pocket threes and ace-jack. You don't want to make them fold that while not getting maximum value from a 7. So I think a bet of like 375 would be the worst bet you could make. So I think you either want to bet a little bit lower to try to get called by pocket threes and ace-jack, or you want to be betting bigger to try to just get value from the decent made hands. So maybe 450 or something like that, or maybe even 500.
With or without overcards. I get one caller, the pot is 1250, and another good turn card. That doesn't change much, I think. It doesn't change anything at all unless Giuliano has got pocket fours. exactly. So I'm very happy with this turn card and I'm going to bet again for value.
So at this point, again, we have to ask ourselves what are we trying to get called by? And at this point on the turn, we're really only trying to get called by a 7 or a flush draw. And I think if you bet something like 800, that's going to get maximum value here. Maybe even something like 900. I don't think we want to bet small because now, I mean, maybe we could bet small, but at that point we are letting the draws come along very cheaply. Like say we were to bet 450 or something like that. I worry you may have bet a little bit too small here to get value from a 7. I don't think a 7 is going to fold to any reasonable bets. I mean, it probably should, but I don't think it will in the $5 game, especially from this guy who's playing 35, 40-ish, whatever this is. So I think I would bet a little bit bigger here on the turn.
This time, just a little bit over half pot, and I like this sizing. I think it's a size that sets up river shove. Could have gone a little bit larger, like 725 maybe, 730. So the PSR, pot stack ratio on the river, would have been a little bit lower. And
it's also worth mentioning, you want to keep the stack to pot ratio as low as possible going to the river so that you can shove and it doesn't look ridiculous.
Yep.
Rough river.
This is one of the rivers that I'm not too happy to see because obviously in Juliano or Juliano range could be a flush draw, it could be pocket eights as well, but it's not the main concern. I think this river is a little bit of an action killer, so even if he does not have a draw, he's probably not going to pay me off with pocket 5, 6s, 7x. So I'm going to check fold. I'm going to check with a plan of check folding because I do not see him turning hands like pocket 5s, pocket 6s into a bluff ever, pretty much ever. And he should not be value betting any worse. And once he bets, I think he's going to have flush almost always. Check.
So I generally agree with this analysis. I think that is just good, fundamentally sound poker. I like that. And I think you pretty much said it all. I think this is a check fold on the river. I think he's going to be checking a lot of his middle pairs and a lot of his 7s. So you win when it goes check, check. And when he bets, it's usually with a bluff, but what bluffs should he have? I mean, there just aren't very many, right? You would think that like ace jack would fold the turn, for example. And he's obviously going to bet the flushes. Interestingly enough, if that's his range, what I just said, he should definitely be bluffing with pocket. Well, probably he should be bluffing with a 7, actually. So this is an interesting spot. Should he be bluffing with a 7 to try to make you fold over pairs? Or should he be bluffing with pocket 2s, 3s, 4s, etc.? I think betting with a 7 here is probably... Well, it's interesting because he would have to think you're not going to bet 6s and worse on the turn if he has a 7 too often. So I don't think his blocker is that relevant. And I think that actually does win at showdown sometimes. So yeah, I think if he's going to be bluffing here, he probably wants to just bluff the stone bottom of his range. There are spots where maybe he wants to be bluffing with a 7. And there are other spots where he may want to be bluffing with pocket 3s. And blockers usually come in play in that scenario. And I think that he probably wants to be bluffing with the pocket 3s here. So if he's good, he'll realize pocket 3s are at the bottom of his range and he will shove. If he's not good, he'll just go check, check, and let you win.
I could get checked behind and...
Wow, so ace queen. Shocking. I just said that I thought he would fold this on the turn. And this is what I was saying, that some of these players are just not very good, right? Oh, I'm sorry. I read this guy's preflop stats wrong earlier. I said that he was 20-something, but he's 35/40, so he's much more active. But we only have 20 hands. Anyway. So yeah, this guy certainly could have had ace-2 offsuit. I apologize for that. Yeah, I think that this is a spot where your opponent messed up pretty bad. He called the flop and the turn and then did not turn the bottom of his range into a bluff on a river. So
the player shows ace queen.
Worked out well for you.
Which is obviously a bad play, and I can tell you why. The main reason is that I was c-betting this dry flop into 3 people, and I continued betting on a really bad turn for my bluffs, for my bluff range, because there are no legitimate draws except for flush draw, but There are no any legitimate draws, and this is a really bad turn to bluff because I should not expect him to fold any hands. So if I had like king jack of clubs or 9-10 of clubs, I would just check fold this turn. I would give up. I would never continue bluffing unless I have a good reason to bet. Continue bluffing on the river and bet rivers. I would never bluff this spot. So yeah, I think I played it okay. Happy with this hand.
Yeah, you played it great, and your opponent did not.